Hey guys, welcome back to Merge. As you can see, it's still cold, still snowing. For as long as I can remember, I've loved watching hockey. In particular, loved watching the Oilers. They were once a really good hockey team. Some of you may not actually think that's true, but they were once a very good hockey team. Back in kind of the 80s, they were one of the best in the world. They had the best players. There was Wayne Gretzky, there was Yari Curry, Paul Coffey, all these amazing hockey players, and they won, I don't know how many, probably, I think 5 Stanley Cups in their time. Man, oh man, they were so good. But as the years have gone on, they haven't been quite as good at times. There were some lean years in the 90s. There were some not so good years in the early 2000s. They made it back to the Stanley Cup final in 2005-2006. Lost to Carolina in Game 7. Heartbreaking to say the least. And they've never really been what they once were. They'd never really been as good as they were in the 80s. And for me as a fan, like that hurts. Like I would love it if they were just as good now as they were then. And it's, you know, it's fun to watch them now at times. They've got some really, they're good players going for them, but in many ways, they're not quite as good as they once were. But that's like most things in life though. What it kind of used to be will never really be the same anymore. You know, we look to even what it was like for us as kids, what we enjoyed eating, what we liked watching, right? We don't do those same things anymore. Now it's changed because everything keeps changing. Life keeps changing. And so we see things, they're not always staying the same. Things shift. In fact, even as we speak right now, you're still changing. You're gonna get one day really old like me. And it'll just still keep on always changing. Life just keeps moving. But there's one thing that never changes. There's one thing that never shifts, and that's God. He never changes who he is. He never changes what he says. He never changes what he does. He is the same yesterday. He's the same today. And he is the same today forever. And so as I look at the Bible, though there's a lot of stories in there that point to a God that we don't see in the same way anymore, do we? You know, for instance, when I look at one of my favorite stories in the book of Exodus, and it's all about a guy named Moses, we see this amazing moment where the entire nation of Israel has now left the land of Egypt. They've been, they've been there as slaves for 400 years, and now they're finally free. But they have to run from the Egyptians. And so when they run from the Egyptians, they get to the Red Sea, and God parts the sea in half. He splits it in two so they can walk all the way across on dry land. But we don't see those anymore, right? We don't see the Red Sea splitting. We don't even see it when we go to the water park at West Edmonton Mall. We don't see those kind of moments. And so we start to wonder, well, maybe God's changed. Maybe he's not the same as he was. Maybe he's shifted in some way. And yet there's something though about God that I think is, though absolutely the same about him that he's always been. And that is he still talks. He still speaks. In fact, we see that all the way in the book of Genesis. We see it at the very beginning where he talks with Adam and Eve. He speaks to them in the garden. And in fact, he does the same thing with Moses. He does the same thing with Adam and Eve. Does the same thing with Abraham. God speaks. And he speaks to what we see in the New Testament with Jesus. There we see God in the flesh speaking out loud to you and I. In fact, all the way it's found in the book of John, chapter 10, we see this amazing moment from Jesus where he actually says to us, my sheep know my voice. He's talking to you and me. He knows that if we listen to him, we can hear his voice. There's a way to hear him actually talk. And so as we kind of take this journey over these next probably 7 to 8 weeks, we want to experience what it's like to hear God talk. But though, first of all, we have to get to know exactly though who he is. We have to start to understand, how do we really know it's his voice? How do we hear his voice in the midst of the noise all around us? Though we have to really get to know what his voice sounds like. And so where we start with that is the Bible. And in fact, I know for a lot of you watching, you may think, I don't really know how much I can read the Bible though. It doesn't really have a lot for me in there. And man, I just want to say to you, it has way more than you could possibly imagine. This is the voice of God written down on paper. It's a way for you and I to know who He is, to really experience Him, so we can get to a place where when we hear Him speak, it makes sense. So in my life, though there's been a lot of experiences where I've wondered if I've actually heard God talk. And I don't know if it's always been true. Sometimes I've wondered if it's just been me. But there are some ways I want to encourage you that though right now today you can start to experience God and you can hear His voice. And so there's actually, I would think about 2 ways in which you can hear His voice. And so the first way doesn't sound fun or glamorous on the surface, but I promise you it's worth it. It's to dive into the Bible. Okay, this is where we see God speak for the first time. This is what He wants us to know about exactly who He is, what His plan is for us, how He loves you, how He loves me, how He loves everyone. And this is a way for you to read His words, to read His voice, for it to be ingrained in your heart, for you to start to know what He actually sounds like. This is God's voice written down for you right there on the page. And so that's the first way in which you can get to know His voice, to hear Him. And there's this other way, and it's more based in prayer. And it's the way that I started to experience His voice when I first started here at the church. And it's a way in which we pause to listen to His voice. It's a moment in which we want Him to speak to us. And though, in fact, I think for a lot of us, when we start to think about, okay, but if I'm going to listen during prayer, what if I hear the wrong thing? What if it's not Him? What if it's just me? But this takes time. This takes time to really start to say to yourself, I need to do this on a regular basis so I can start to experience God's voice. And so, though, as we kind of move into now what is almost kind of the end of our time here, I just have one thing I want you to do, outside of probably 2 or 3 questions that you're going to answer with your small group. Okay, but here's something that we can do in the midst of right now for prayer, that I just want you to pause, because we're going to ask Jesus a question. In fact, we see this all the time in Scripture. We see people asking God all kinds of questions, and we also see, though, in the midst of those questions, that God answers those questions. He is kind to you. He wants to answer your questions. He wants to talk to you. And so there's a question, though, that I'm going to ask Jesus, and this is now to on your behalf, right? That you would pause here later on and just say, okay, Jesus, what is the answer to this question? And so it's simple. Jesus, what do you really, really like about me? Jesus, what do you like about me? Right, that's an important question that I think we all need to know the answer to, because He likes you, He loves you, He wants you to hear from Him. And so over the next, like I say, 6 or probably 7, 8 weeks, we want you to experience God's voice. That I think in the midst of everything that you've gone through, there's a God who so is crazy in love with you, who wants you to know Him. He wants you to hear His voice. And it is such an amazing feeling when you do. And so guys, this is my encouragement to you. This is what we have from Jesus today. This is what He is inviting you and me into, that we would experience Him and that we would hear Him talk today.